Bryce he was just full of life. If he had something he loved it passionately. And when he was a little kid, he loved sharks. And so it was sharks everything. And we had stuffed sharks and shark teeth necklaces, and he was gonna be a marine biologist when he grew up. When he found something that he liked, he just dove in. He just loved it. As a little kid, he was pretty timid and quiet and shy and reserved. But there was a point at which he just that flipped, and he loved adventure, and he loved fast cars, and he rode a motorcycle, and he would go to the river and go cliff diving with his friends. He lived life large. Everything he did big. He had a Mustang. His dad and I bought him a Mustang, and he had to have, the big one. He had to have the V8. It had to be manual transmission. And he drove it fast, and he drove it hard. And he loved that car. And then later he bought another one. And at one point he had a motorcycle, and of course he couldn't just get a motorcycle that was great for transportation. He had to get a fast one. And, of course he crashed all those cars and the motorcycles and lived through it all. But that was just Bryce's personality, just big, fast. He loved photography, and he would take his car and take his camera and get all these cool videos and pictures, and he was really good at it. Another thing that he just loved was fishing. He would go fishing. He had this favorite fishing spot. He would go there and fish. He'd caught more salmon than he knew what to do with one year. He lived walking distance basically of a lake, and he would go down and take this little boat with a trolling motor out and fish that lake. Just loved fishing. He loved it. A couple of months after he died, we took some of his ashes and we threw them in the river. And his favorite fishing spot. And we had just an informal ceremony there, but we had a big turnout of all of his friends. Ones from Washington that couldn't come to Texas for his service. We had a small box, just a biodegradable box that was meant to go in the water, and his sister threw it in the water. Bryce suffered from anxiety, and he was at some point diagnosed as bipolar, and so he had good times and he had bad times, and he did the self-medicating. There were times when Bryce wasn't using drugs and he wasn't drinking and he was doing great. And then there were times when he wasn't. And he didn't ever want to be on prescribed medication. For whatever reason, he just wouldn't take it for any period of time. But he would go through these stages where he did Xanax, he did Percocet, and he would just self-medicate. The anxiety would get to him. The depression would get to him. He never went to rehab. He never was. I'm sure his addiction was bad, but he would always pull himself out of it and get himself in a good spot. And then, life would get difficult and he would go back to it. Bryce was living with me And then he enrolled himself in culinary school. And it started out online. So he did the first 6-week phase online, and he lived with me. And then he had to move out and go. He got into student housing. He was doing great. His grades were phenomenal. He had these 3 roommates that, he was just thrown into student housing. They weren't culinary students. They were students at UT. But he just fit right in with these kids, and they had so much fun. And I'm sure they did a lot more partying than I want to know about. But he'd also had a job. He got a job as a line cook, and he loved it. And he was working a lot, and he was going to school, and he was doing great. And he just got stressed out, I think. And he started using drugs again. And he just kind of went off the deep end, his roommates knew that he was using a little too much. But it was only in the few weeks before he died. It was a Sunday night. It was 9:00 at night, said goodnight to his roommates. They always said, "I love you" to each other before they went to bed. He said goodnight. And at 11:00 the next morning, he hadn't come out of his room. One of his roommates went in, and he was kind of laying up against the door. They had a hard time getting the door open. And he was gone. He was long gone. And he had fentanyl, he had benzodiazepines, he had a little bit of alcohol, and he had cocaine in his system. And a lot of people were surprised about the cocaine. We knew that he did, the benzodiazepines, and they did the Percocet sometimes, but he never would have taken fentanyl. He never would have done that. Bryce didn't want to die. But his dad had actually talked to him Sunday night or Sunday afternoon. They had a good conversation. He said, he said he was going to come down the following week and visit him. His dad still lives up in Seattle. But his dad said he was going to come down and visit him. He said he sounded like he was in good spirits. He said, "I know he'd had a rough week, but he sounded like he was in good spirits." And his dad did a lot of looking at his phone through text messages, Snapchat, websites. And he had seen a lot of, it looked like there was drugs bought off Snapchat, the dark web, things I didn't even know about. But there was evidence of all that. No, I mean, that was all presented to Austin police, but they weren't interested in anything. They never even took Bryce's phone or anything. My daughter talked to a lot of his friends in the few days after he died, and his one friend said, he talked about how much he loved his family. They called 911. 911 did have them perform CPR on Bryce, but he was, I'm sure that Bryce died late Sunday night or early Monday morning. There was no saving him. He was cold. He was, there was no going back. At about 4:00 in the afternoon, 4:15 in the afternoon, I had a Temple police officer pull up. It was actually my garage. He pulled up, and he parked across the street. He walked up to my house, and he said, "Ms. Foote?" And I said, "Yes." knew when he said that something was wrong. He said, I'm sorry to tell you your son has passed away. And my daughter happened to be home at the time, and she was in the house. And she ran out. And I still remember I could just barely stand up. I just wanted to fall to the ground. It's been hard for my daughter. It's her only brother, her only sibling. And I have a little granddaughter who will be 4. And it's heartbreaking that my little granddaughter probably won't remember. She probably won't remember Uncle Bryce. We talk about him. She sees pictures of him. She knows he's in heaven. She says, Uncle Bryce is with Jesus. But it just hurts knowing that she won't have him to play with. They had this weird bond where they would just sit at the dinner table and just make faces at each other and make each other laugh. And she won't have that. My daughter's had to be strong for me because most days I can barely function. And she has to do a lot for me. And I feel bad because she lost a brother and she lost the mom that she used to know. There just has to be something done to stop the fentanyl deaths. You know, there's hundreds of kids dying every day, and I don't think people know about it. The people that I've talked to, they don't know about it. People need to know, and we need to work harder on getting it stopped. And kids need to know that they can't experiment with drugs. It's just, you know, they're playing Russian roulette with anything they take. Because there's kids that take one time and they die. There's kids like Bryce that, you know, do drugs on and off. They don't want to die. Bryce would be crushed if he knew how this affected our family. He wouldn't want this for us.